Somewhere in northern China, a desert the size of Belgium started turning green, and almost nobody outside the country noticed until satellite images leaked online showing something that looked physically impossible. Sand dunes that had swallowed roads, villages, and entire river systems for 1,000 years were shrinking. And according to a story that has now been viewed hundreds of millions of times across the internet, the secret behind it wasn't heavy machinery. It wasn't government bulldozers. It wasn't even trees. It was rabbits. Over 1 million of them released directly into the desert. If that sounds too strange to be true, stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what happened here. Chinese officials looked out at the Kubuqi Desert in Inner Mongolia, nearly 19,000 square kilometers of shifting sand, and decided on one of the strangest fixes in environmental history. Instead of just planting trees and hoping for the best, they allegedly released over 1 million Rex rabbits, a French breed famous for its soft fur, directly into the dunes near a place called Daylad Banner. The logic, as it's usually explained, sounds almost too simple to work. Rabbits eat invasive weeds and fresh plant shoots. Rabbits produce huge amounts of manure loaded with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, exactly the nutrients barren sand is missing. And rabbits breed unbelievably fast. Some versions of the story claim each female can produce up to 40 or 50 babies a year. Turn 1 million of them loose, the theory goes, and you get a self-replicating army of tiny soil engineers, fertilizing as they hop across the sand, spreading seeds through their droppings, trimming plant growth into shape, and slowly turning dead land into something that can support life again. From there, the story only gets bigger. Supposedly, local farmers started raising these same rabbits for meat and fur, and average incomes in the region shot up to around $20,000 a year. The United Nations allegedly designated the area a global ecological and economic demonstration zone. Agricultural officials from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates reportedly flew in to study the model firsthand, hoping to bring it back to their own deserts. Farmers, riding the momentum, supposedly expanded into potato farming across more than 40,000 square kilometers, with 12,000 farmers producing close to 2 million kilograms of potatoes a year on land that used to be pure sand. It's an incredible story. It's also been copy-pasted, reworded, and reposted by channel after channel, blog after blog, almost always with the exact same statistics, word for word. And that last detail is exactly what made us stop and dig deeper. So we went looking for the original source, a government press release, a scientific study, a United Nations report, anything that could actually back this up. We found nothing. No Chinese government agency has ever announced releasing rabbits into the Kubuqi Desert. Elion Resources Group, the actual company that has spent more than 3 decades restoring this exact desert, has never mentioned it either, not in any statement, not in any annual report. There is no primary source, not one. And once you start comparing the different versions of the story against each other, they don't even agree. Depending on which video or article you check, the number of rabbits changes. 1 million, 1.2 million, 4 million, 4.5 million. The location shifts too. Sometimes it's Daylad Banner specifically. Sometimes it's just the Kubuqi Desert in general, with no further detail at all. That kind of drift is the signature of a story being copy-pasted and reworded across dozens of low-effort content mills, not something independently reported by journalists who actually verified it with sources on the ground. We even found the exact same block of text, originally written in Portuguese, translated and republished across multiple completely unrelated websites, word for word, right down to the $20,000 income figure. Underneath one of those reposts, a reader had left a comment asking, essentially, where is this desert supposed to be? And is this just fake news? One independent investigator who looked into this claim directly reached a simple conclusion. There has been no official statement from anyone about releasing rabbits into the desert, and testing with animals doesn't appear to have ever been part of China's actual desertification program. The most likely explanation is that a real photograph of Rex rabbits, which genuinely are farmed in that region, got separated from its original context and slowly mutated, retelling by retelling, into China released 1 million rabbits into the wild. So here's the twist. The viral version of this story, a coordinated million-rabbit release into open desert, appears to be fiction, a myth that spread because it's a great headline, not because anyone ever checked if it was real. But here's what's wild. The actual story of what happened to this desert is more impressive than the myth. It just never got the same clickbait treatment, so almost nobody outside China has heard it. So let's tell you what actually happened. If you're enjoying this so far, drop a comment telling us the next viral story you want us to fact check, because we read every single one. And go ahead and subscribe now if you haven't already, because the next few minutes are the part of this video where the real story kicks in, and it involves a bankrupt salt mine, a rocket scientist, and a solar panel shaped like a horse that you can actually go look at on a satellite map right now. The real story doesn't start with rabbits. It starts with salt. In 1988, a man named Wang Wenbiao took over a nearly bankrupt salt works sitting in the middle of the Kubuqi Desert. There was a serious logistics problem. The nearest railway depot was only 65 kilometers away in a straight line. But because there was no road cutting through the desert, every load of salt had to be hauled 350 kilometers the long way around. And whenever a sandstorm hit, which was often, all transport stopped completely, sometimes for days at a time. Wang built a direct road through the desert to save his business. The sand swallowed it almost immediately. That failure forced a realization that would define the next 35 years. You couldn't build around the desert. You had to actually tame it, and it had to benefit the people who lived there, or none of it would ever last. Welfare projects alone don't survive, as one of Wang's colleagues later put it. You need an economic engine, not just good intentions. What followed became one of the largest land restoration projects on the planet. And unlike the rabbit story, this one is backed by names you can check yourself. Time Magazine, the state news agency Xinhua, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and independent academic reviews. Over the following decades, Wang's company restored roughly 6,000 square kilometers of desert into productive, sustainable greenland, generating an estimated $5 billion in what's called gross ecosystem production. In 2013, the project won the United Nations Global Dryland Champion Award, specifically recognizing its impact on local people's lives. But none of that would have been possible without a trick discovered 30 years earlier for a completely different reason. In 1955, scientists at the Shapatu Desert Research Station needed to stop moving sand from burying a railway line cutting straight through the Tanger Desert. Their solution was almost embarrassingly simple. They laid ordinary wheat straw into a checkerboard grid across the dunes, half buried in the sand, in roughly 1 meter squares. That's it. No machinery, no chemicals, just straw, arranged like a giant checkerboard laid across the sand. The effect was staggering. It cut sand movement by up to 99.5%, blocking wind at ground level and slowly letting organic matter build back up in the soil underneath. It worked so well that international experts praised it at a United Nations desertification conference in Nairobi back in 1977, and scientists from other countries started traveling to this remote corner of China specifically to learn the technique. This nearly 70-year-old, incredibly low-tech method is still one of the primary tools used to stabilize sand dunes around the world today, and most people have simply never heard of it. Here's a detail almost nobody connects to any of this. Part of the intellectual foundation for China's desert strategy came from a man far better known for something completely different: rockets. Chen Shusen helped co-found what eventually became NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the United States before being deported during the Red Scare of the 1950s over unproven suspicions of communist sympathies. Back in China, he went on to become the father of the country's rocket and space program. But in 1984, Chen turned his attention to something far less glamorous than rockets: the desert itself. He argued that simply planting trees would never solve desertification on its own, because deserts weren't dead land, they were underused land. He proposed treating deserts as their own economic zone, combining livestock, agriculture, and industry into a single integrated system, a concept he called deserticulture. That theory became the intellectual backbone for exactly the kind of combined farming and industry model that Wang Wenbiao would go on to build in Kubuqi. Now, here's where the myth and the reality actually connect, because there is a real rabbit story buried inside all of this. Rex rabbit farming in the Kubuqi region is genuinely real. It's just not what the viral version claims. Local farmers do raise Rex rabbits for their fur and meat, but on controlled, managed farms, not released into open desert. Their manure genuinely does get used as fertilizer for willow trees and other vegetation planted across the region. And rabbit farming genuinely is one small piece of a much larger economic ecosystem that includes licorice farming, tourism, and solar energy. So the myth isn't pure invention, it's a small, real agricultural detail that got wildly inflated because 1 million rabbits released into the wild spreads a lot faster online than farmers raise rabbits on managed farms as one piece of a 35-year infrastructure project. If you want a genuinely jaw-dropping moment from this story, one that's fully verified and not up for debate, it isn't rabbits. It's a horse. In that same Kubuqi Desert, engineers built something called the Junma Solar Power Station, 196,320 solar panels arranged to form the shape of a galloping horse, covering nearly 1.4 million square meters of desert floor. Guinness World Records certified it in 2019 as the largest image ever created out of solar panels. It's part of a much larger initiative Chinese state media has nicknamed the Solar Great Wall, a planned 250-mile-long corridor of solar panels designed to eventually generate up to 100 gigawatts of power. NASA's own Earth Observatory has compared satellite images of the region from 2017 to 2024, and they show the solar fields expanding rapidly across what used to be nothing but bare dunes. These panels don't just generate electricity either. Mounted above ground level, they block wind, reduce evaporation, and create shade where grass and crops can now grow underneath them in a place that couldn't support plant life a few years ago. This is a real, ongoing, satellite-confirmed transformation. No conflicting numbers, no copy-pasted blog posts, just orbital photography, years apart, showing sand turning into infrastructure and underneath that infrastructure, green. And Kubuqi isn't even the most dramatic example in China. A few hundred kilometers away, the Mu-Us Desert, once one of the country's 4 major deserts, has been reduced so dramatically that in 2020, provincial officials in Shanxi announced that 93.24% of its desertified land had been treated, effectively erasing it from the official provincial map. The transformed area is roughly the size of Belgium, covered by an estimated 40 million trees, planted not by one company, but by generations of local villagers, including a group of 54 teenage girls who started planting windbreaks back in the 1970s and simply never stopped. Independent satellite data backs all of this up at a national scale, not just in these 2 regions. A 2019 NASA Earth Observatory study analyzing satellite data from 2000 to 2017 found that China alone accounted for roughly a quarter of the entire planet's total increase in green vegetation during that period, more than any other single country on Earth. Now, to be completely fair to you, we're not going to pretend this story is flawless because it isn't, and the honest version is actually more interesting than a fairy tale anyway. In the year 2000, a single pest infestation wiped out roughly 1 billion planted poplar trees in Ningxia province in one blow, erasing about 2 decades of planting effort almost overnight. The reason? More than 80% of China's massive 3 North Shelter Belt forests, the broader program these projects belong to, are monoculture plantations, meaning vast areas planted with just 1 or 2 tree species. Those forests grow fast, but they form fragile, disease-prone ecosystems with almost no natural resistance built in. Independent researchers have raised a deeper concern too. Planting large numbers of thirsty non-native trees in an already dry region can lower local water tables over time, putting pressure on the same groundwater that people, livestock, and other plants depend on to survive. The World Bank has actually pushed China to prioritize the quality and native diversity of its plantings over sheer tree count, specifically because of this issue. Interestingly, in certain zones of the Kubuqi project specifically, regional reports point the other way, with local water tables rising by roughly 1.5 to 2 meters over about 20 years, as returning vegetation and better managed irrigation helped rainfall soak into the ground instead of running straight off the surface. 2 very different outcomes from 2 different approaches to planting in the same kind of dry land, which tells you management matters just as much as the idea itself. None of this erases what's actually been accomplished here. If anything, it makes the achievement more believable because real engineering projects have setbacks, failures, and course corrections. Fairy tales don't. Only real ones do. So let's land this. No, there is no solid evidence that China ever released 1 million rabbits into the desert. That specific story appears to be an internet myth, copy-pasted into existence by channels that never bothered to check where it came from. But real farmers really do raise rabbits there, on real managed farms. A real rocket scientist really did help design the economic theory behind reclaiming the desert. A 70-year-old straw trick really does stop sand dead in its tracks. A real company spent 35 years turning what locals used to call the Sea of Death into productive, livable land. And somewhere in that same desert right now, there is a solar panel horse the size of a small city, visible from orbit, that you can go verify with your own eyes on a satellite map today. The truth, it turns out, never actually needed the exaggeration. It just needed somebody to actually look. If this video changed how you're going to look at the next viral story that pops up on your feed, that's the entire point of this channel. And the best way to see the next one is to subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. And if you made it all the way to the end, tell us in the comments. Should we go debunk the Australian rabbit disaster next and show you what actually happens when 1 million rabbits get released into the wild with nobody controlling them? Because that story, unlike this one, is completely, terrifyingly real.